Welcome. Hello, Kate Mildenhall. My name is Jane Harper. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. I'm so delighted today to be talking to this fantastic author, Kate Mildenhall, about her amazing book, The Motherfold, which I had the pleasure of reading out here in Australia a few months ago. And now out in the UK, you're going to get the chance to enjoy it. I love this book. Kate, I'm so excited to be speaking to you about it. So let's jump right in. Kate Mildenhall, tell us about this wonderful book, The Motherfold.
Thank you so much, Jane Harper, who I'm so excited to be talking to. It's an absolute thrill, and I know that we chat a lot about your books as well. So it's very fun to be talking to you. Thank you. The Mother Fault is a book about Mim, who's a mum. She lives in a very near future Australia. She's got two little kids, and she's been at home for the last 10 years as away from her work as a geologist as she raises them. But when the novel opens, her husband, who is an engineer and he works on a mine in Indonesia, has gone missing. So in this future, very near future world, everyone in Australia has a chip implanted in their hand, and that is partly for ease so that they can check in wherever they're going, but it's also part of kind of ubiquitous surveillance, and this proves to be a problem for Mim as she suddenly realizes she really wants to find where her husband is. The department who's in charge puts some pressure on her not to go anywhere, and she does what maybe any good mum would do, which is risk the children's lives to try and keep them safe.
And, Kate, one thing I love about this book, there's so many themes and there's so many great characters in this story. So when you were, I'm interested, when you first came up with the idea for this book, what was it that drew you, of the many things in this book, what was it that drew you to this story?
So I had my first book was historical fiction. It was miles away from this book. It was based on a true story. It's called Skylarking, and just completely different. And because I don't like doing what I'm told, I'm a little bit of a misbehaver, I decided that I wanted to write as far away from it as possible. And in that kind of weird aftermath of your first book coming out, when I was doing promo and things like that, my kids were still really small, so about 2 and 4. And I was still in that zone of early-ish motherhood. They weren't at school yet. I was spending a lot of time with them, where you kind of wildly move from being deeply in love with your children to wanting to put them in the rubbish bin some days when things get a little bit tough, And so I was deep in the trenches of early motherhood. And then here in Australia at that time, and I know that this is a global issue that was, continues to affect the UK as well. I was continually reading the stories of particularly women who were fleeing their homes because of war, because of, variety of reasons, trying to keep their children safe. And they were seeking refuge and asylum in other countries. And here in Australia, our way of dealing with that was to refuse them entry. So there was a lot of rage involved in that for me, but I was also thinking about this idea that how can a mother go, or a parent go, from being deeply frustrated at the way that her life has turned out. Potentially she's no longer in the job that she had, she doesn't feel like the same woman that she was, because of her children, and yet know that if she had to, she would do anything to protect them. So they were the two kind of ideas that were clashing up against each other for me, and I suddenly had this thought: what if a woman had to flee Australia on a boat with her kids to keep them safe? So that's where it started.
And it's such a great concept, I think, as well. And Mim, the main character, is such a beautifully written character. I thought she was so relatable, and in for exactly that sense, she was a woman that I really felt like I could recognize. I know women like her. I feel part of me is like her myself, and yet she's forced into this kind of extreme position. Tell me a little bit about Mim. Where did she come from? Was she very early on in your in your planning process, or did she sort of evolve as you were writing it? Or
it's a great question, Jane, because she really did evolve. And the biggest problem I had straight up is that I was writing a mother of 2 young children, and I was super conscious that I couldn't just write myself and my own experiences. And of course, a lot of the experiences in there do reflect mine. And my poor husband, when he read the book for the first time, went, I see what you've done here. But I was also drawing on the experiences of the women around me and other parents and the kind of books that I was reading. But one of the things I had to do for Mim is that I knew really early on that if I was in trouble, like Mim is in trouble, and I had to go into hiding or go on the run, that my girlfriends, my extraordinary group of women who have been in my life since I was kind of in year 7, would do anything to help me. They would hide me. They would give me all their money. They would potentially kill for me if I asked them. And so what I knew I needed to do from a kind of plot and character perspective was make Mim a little bit more of a loner. Have her, because of the situation she's in where she's really had to move away from her work and her colleagues. She is... there's a thread through there that she's kind of dealt with some postnatal depression as well, and this has alienated her further from her community, and she's moved from the country where her family is down to the city, so she doesn't have them around her. And once I shifted that to make Mim more of a loner and not have those best friends around her, I found it was easier to move with her then. I knew that she was pushing forward in a way that worked. I also am not a geologist, and I find that kind of immersing myself in the research is something that I really like to do. So I went along to a bunch of first year university lectures, like 101, earth sciences, because I really wanted to understand how her worldview might be different because of the way she thought about time and space. Because I know that as I started reading these kinds of books on geology, that the understanding of deep time and time being this very big kind of idea might really change the way you think about getting through those first 2 or 3 or 4 years of your child's life. So that was a really interesting part of the process as well.
And that was such a great part of her character as well. I thought that was such a beautiful touch. And I'm interested that you actually went and sat in on those lectures, because I think that shows the research that you've done for this book, I think, is extraordinary. And I think you've woven it in such a beautiful way, in that it comes through so naturally to the reader, while sort of underpinning everything, which I think is such a it's such a hard thing to do as a writer, and I think you absolutely nailed it with this. And one thing I did want to ask you about specifically with research was there's a quite a big chunk of the book where Mim and her children are on a yacht. Now, this is a story for another day, but I myself once went as an amateur on a yacht across an ocean.
Did you get sick?
I did. Yes.
Oh, Jane.
I hated it. It was terrible. It was.
Why did you do that?
It's a bit of a long story. I was working as a journalist, and I was sort of signed to cover this sort of cross ocean race. And I was completely underprepared. I was very naive about it. And I'm not a sailor, and I'm not good on the water. 2 things which I would say were fairly essential. That kind of feeling of, and this was years ago, but when I was reading The Mother Fault, and I'm reading, Mim making this journey on this yacht with this it's such an unfamiliar surround, and it came rushing back to me. I thought you absolutely nailed that sense of just kind of bewilderment, but you have to understand it, because this is your vessel that is going to keep you alive and keep you out of the water. So you have the learning curve is so steep.
Huge.
Now I know that you went on a yacht for this, so tell me about that, because what an incredible kind of dedication to research that is.
Or just being foolish and mad, really, Jane. So what I realized is that I was doing a lot of Googling to work out which way she would leave Australia. And I knew she needed to get to Indonesia. And foolishly, very early on, I had my big map of Australia up on the wall, and I thought, she'll just get on somewhere on the east coast and go up. And then a yachty said to me, that will take weeks. Get her on in Darwin. I was like, okay, we'll get on in Darwin. And so I was Googling Darwin to Indonesia, yacht races or yacht maps. And I found this yacht race that went from Darwin to Ambon in Indonesia. And I went, this looks cool. So I looked at it, and I knew I have never sailed. I've been on like one of those little boats around the bottom of Turkey when I was a backpacker. I haven't sailed. I knew that I didn't get sick, but apparently seasickness can come on at any time. So I knew that too. But I spend a lot of time on the coast in Australia, and I knew that I'm probably not scared enough of the ocean, as I should be. And I wanted, like you said, that I wanted to know what it felt like to be surrounded completely by water, and to try and imagine what that would be like when you're also trying to keep your kids safe. Because I'm one of those parents who, like, when I'm on a pier with the kids and they're looking over to look at the fish, I'm like, yeah, come back, come back. So anyway, so I'm Googling this race, and it said down the bottom looking for crew. And I was like, oh, well, I've got nothing to lose. So I sent off this email saying, my name's Kate. I have absolutely no experience sailing, but I'm very enthusiastic and friendly, and I'll make coffee or whatever. And I'm writing a book, thinking that someone would think that was exciting. But I didn't hear anything back, and I didn't expect to. And then about 2 weeks before the race, I got a phone call from Neville, Captain Neville from Darwin, who said, are you still interested in the boat? And I was like, yes, I am. And he needed a woman because someone had pulled out, and he needed someone to hot bunk. So in sailing terms, I didn't understand that now then, but I do now. In sailing terms, that means that I was to share a bed and a berth with another woman, just on different shifts. So I was on the midnight to 6 a.m. shift was what I was on. So I flew up to Darwin. There were 6 blokes and 1 woman on this yacht. And my husband said, well, like, if you feel weird about it, just come home. and off we sailed to Darwin. And it was to Ambon, sorry. It was the most extraordinary experience, both physically being on the yacht and learning so much so quickly about wind and the way it moved, and understanding that when you're on a yacht, it actually kind of surfs down a wave when the waves, like, it just felt completely different to what I expected it to feel. So there was all of that extraordinary experience. And then I realized pretty quickly on that my currency, the thing that I could be useful for on the yacht, was to ask questions and to hear stories. So from midnight till 6 a.m. every night and morning, I just asked these kind of old sailors about their lives and about the experiences they'd had. And it was just transformative. And I was actually at the same time doing a mentorship with the Australian writer Charlotte Wood. And she had said to me, just take thousands of photographs, take them of the corners of things, and what the kitchen looks like, and the patterns on things, because that's the kind of stuff that you're going to want to look back at. And I did do that, thousands and thousands of photographs. And then when we arrived in Ambon, it's this tiny little island, and we got this incredible welcome because they don't have a lot of tourism there. So we had dinner at the mayor's house, and there was kind of an army with us all the time to clear streets and things like that, and help us visit schools and meet the locals. But I got off the yacht then because it suddenly became very small, and I had a hotel on my own for 3 nights for the first time, kind of like since I'd been a backpacker. And I felt free and strong, and like I'd done this incredible thing, that I had sailed across an ocean, not protecting my kids like Mim does, but I had a sense of a kind of an earlier me who was much braver and stronger than the me I am now. And that really helped when I came back to Australia on a tiny little aeroplane, which was the moment I actually thought I was going to die. When I came back to Australia, I felt like I had this real energy for Mim, and the sense that as women, we can be our 20-year-old backpacking self, and we can be our professional self, and we can be our mother self, if that's who we are. And all of those things are a part of who we are together.
And I thought that, it's so interesting you say that, because I thought that really shone through with Mim, because at different points in the book, she's a different woman to different people. To her kids, she'll always be the mum. To, the blast from the past, she's still the young girl on the beach. To her husband, she's the wife. To her friends and her family, she's someone else. And I thought that kind of that multiple sense of self, I thought that's interesting that sort of stemmed, I guess, from that experience you had, sailing on there. And I was interested as well with you in terms of, doing that kind of level of in-depth research, how you then, set about translating that onto the page. Because I know, I think you kept a diary when you were writing this book. So how do you go about, such a huge experience, how do you go about then distilling that down into what you need, for the reader?
It's such a good question. Yes, I do. I keep a journal now, partly because when my first book came out, I was really thrown in that kind of aftermath when you're doing promo and people are asking you questions like you're asking me now. I got this real sense that I had forgotten how my book came to be. And so, my background is in teaching and history. I was like, right, that's it. From now on, I'm going to journal this so I know what happens when. So the journal has been incredible because it does have all of that information in there. And of course, your natural inclination first up when you've had an experience like that, I know you probably did the same with your diving for the survivors, is you put too much on the page. You want to get it all down. You're like, look at this incredible thing that's happened to me. You get it all down. I was really lucky to have some mates who are yachties who read through for me. I also needed to do things like have phone calls with people to say, how does an engine work and how does it stop working? They're the kinds of narrative plot points that you need, but you also need to understand how that works. One of my favorite things, and I don't know if you do this as well, Jane, is I have a writer doctor friend who does help with things like, well, when there's a massive injury on a boat, which there is in the Mother Fault, what happens next? What happens with the blood? How long does infection take? All of those kinds of things. So that's kind of fun to get on the page too. I think what I could really draw on is that Mim is utterly inexperienced in being on the yacht, and so was I. And so she starts to learn the language and the kind of vocab of the yacht as she's on it, which is kind of what I did too. I wish that I had have had the exciting experience in terms of the storm, not the other exciting experience that she has on board the boat with her ex-boyfriend. But I wish that I had have had a storm kind of moment. And actually, I don't know if you've read Catherine Hayman's new book, Fury, which I think is coming out in the UK very soon, which is memoir. And she does have this extraordinary kind of moment in a storm on a boat, on a fishing trawler. And there was parts of me that really wanted that drama, but other parts that didn't.
That's right. Well, I mean, you did a beautiful job of capturing it. Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that's interesting about this book as well with the research, because there were obviously elements of this that, you couldn't research because they are futuristic. You take us into this kind of near future, very, I thought, frighteningly recognizable world where, you can see this stuff coming kind of just around the corner. So it's close enough to feel quite personal. So I wanted to invite you, actually, if you wouldn't mind, to maybe read a short passage, which I think sort of sums up a little bit about this sort of futuristic topic that you bring into the book. So before you start reading, just tell us a little bit why have you chosen this passage particularly?
So this passage is one that readers often contact me about as one that really deeply affects them. I'm not going to take you all the way into it. You can read it yourself. But this passage is where Mim has gone on the run. She's gone back home to the country town that she grew up in, and she's sought out her old best mate, Heidi, who is a vet, because she knows that the thing that is holding them back is the fact that they are being tracked through the chips in their hands. So she's with Heidi. She's with the two kids, Essie, who is 11, and Sam, who is 6. And this is the intro to what has to happen for them. She doesn't tell the kids. She doesn't know what to say. In the car, when they ask if they are getting the pizza now, she is vague, says it's still early, following Heidi's double cabin ute into town and round to the campus where the lab is. She still hasn't told them as Heidi swipes them into the lab, the strange antiseptic smell of it cool as they enter. Heidi introduces the kids to the only animals in there at the moment, a pair of little bush rats racing circles in their cage. Poor little fellas want to get back out there. Will they though? Sam says, all big-eyed. Will you put them back? Sure we will. They're precious. Not many of these little guys left, Heidi reassures him. We do some tests, take some notes, some DNA, implant them both with a tracker, and send them back out. Ha, like me, Sam says and holds up his palm. Heidi looks at Mim. Yeah, like you, mate. So, kids, this is the deal. Mim moves over to them while Heidi starts quietly laying out instruments on the bench. You know the chips in your hands. Essie is wary-eyed. Yeah, she says. Sam looks confused. And you know how you can use them for lots of different things? Yeah, says Essie again. Well, other people use them too. Yours, I mean. Heidi is angling her body away, but Mim can see the flash of the surgical instruments. She is suddenly filled with doubt. I can't, she says softly. Heidi moves closer. We use the trackers to work out where our little mate here is, right? She says. The kids look at her, nod. Well, they do the same with you. I know this already, Essie says, interrupting. Course you do, says Heidi. You're smart. So you'll understand that right now it's important no one knows where you are. What? Mum, why? Essie's face is panicked. Mim reaches for her, just for a little while. It's important for Dad. It's important for Dad that we can't be found. Why, Mum? I don't get it. Essie is angry. Sam is working himself up, his little face moving between confusion and panic. Because Dad loves you so much, and the most important thing to him is that you are safe, that we are all safe. And the only way we can be safe now is not to be found. Where's Dad? I want him. I want to talk to him. Essie's voice is tumbling over itself. Heidi's face clouds. Mim shushes, soothes. We can't right now, but we are going to find him. We've just got to be a bit secret about it. So can we turn them off? Sam is looking at his hand, running his fingers over his palm. She swallows, takes a deep breath. No, Sam, we can't. Then, his little face is crumpling. Then what are we going to do? How do we not get found? I want to turn it off. He holds his hand away towards her, eyes wild. Essie is looking around now, taking in Heidi, the instruments laid out on the table. She's going to cut them out of us. Mum? Sam's voice is so small, his eyes dark and crushed. No. Essie places her palms against each other as if in a gesture of prayer. You can't do that. Hey, Mim soothes, encircling Sam with one arm, kneeling in front of Essie, bringing them both close. It's okay. She can feel them trembling under her hands. Heidi moves quietly around the lab. What about school and unlocking the front door? Everything. How are we going to do all that? How do we put them back? Please don't be so clever, Mim thinks, not now. We'll sort all that out when we get home, huh? No problems. When are we going home? Where's Dad? Mim speaks calmly. Let's get this done and then we can talk about it more. I'll go first, okay? And you can see and then we can decide. They blink at her, nod at her smile, her open face, the way she is fooling them, fooling herself, that everything is going to be all right.
I love it. What a kind of a chilling chapter that was, and just that sense, I think, of Mim wanting to protect her children, and when she thinks to her daughter, please don't think too hard about this, don't be so smart about this, and I thought the daughter was particularly beautiful, the way she was at that age where she was just having that kind of awareness, like you couldn't really fool her anymore.
No. And she was so hard to write, Jane, because, not hard, but I originally had them younger. And then over the 4 years as I wrote the book, my children obviously got older, and particularly my eldest daughter started conversing with me in that way where you suddenly like, this is a whole little person with their own brain and their own ideas. And it's astonishing and wonderful and terrifying at the same time. But really, I did want that relationship between Mim and Essie to be kind of the primary relationship in the book as well.
And I thought the relationships in this book were so well written. I mean, that there was so many kind of fluid, changing dynamics between the characters. Mim and Essie is the mother and daughter, and that daughter being a certain age, I thought was so perfectly done, because it is such a difficult age where it's child, but then it's in some way she the daughter is an adult in her thinking as well, and you can't get things past her in a way you can with the little boy. So I mean with those relationships, I mean, did you always know that you wanted the children with Mim on her entire journey, or were you tempted to ditch them back in Darwin at some point?
Well, from a writing and kind of technical point of view, I wanted to ditch them because it was really, really hard to have them on every page, like as hard as it is to look after children all the time, because they were always there, and I had to think about who had the duty of care for them at different times, especially when Mim's having adult conversations, and then when there's this kind of without a spoiler, kind of flurry of romance on the boat, and a yacht is quite small, so to get them out of the way there, that was quite tricky. But what it did do is that technical difficulty of having the kids with her all the time. I kind of leaned into it in the end, and realized, like, this is frustrating. This is why, even when you are on the run for your life, and you are looking for your husband, and you are protecting your kids, that when your child has a tantrum, it's still incredibly frustrating, and you are reduced back down to my child having a tantrum in the supermarket kind of stage. So I think that was kind of really important. And the other thing I realized, again, as the book progresses, and no spoilers, but that the most terrible thing that could happen to Mim is that something happened to her children. And I don't know if you have this, Jane, but we so often protect our characters, especially the characters that we love. And I love Mim, and I love those kids, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to them. But of course, I'm also a writer who's writing a literary thriller, and bad things are going to happen. So kind of pushing myself to make her be scared and terrified, and to have bad things happen to her, was tricky, but part of the process too.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you did keep them throughout the novel, really, because I mean, the technical challenges of including those characters throughout, I fully appreciate were quite intense. But bravo to you, because I think that was exactly the right choice, because we learn so much about Mim through her interactions with her children. And there's one like really sort of small moment that has actually stayed with me all this time later after reading the book, which is when Essie is on the yacht, and she gets her first period, and Mim is having to deal with this moment that really, I mean, ideally would be in the comfort of their own home, where they can sit and talk, and Essie's not having to deal with this in like a tiny yacht toilet, and I thought that was such a kind of just these two meetings of worlds, and it really showed this sort of extreme situation, but ultimately Mim's role as a mother
Absolutely.
is utmost, really.
And that's always our role. And I think, it was really important to me to include that scene for a number of reasons, and partly because of the age my girls are, as well as is realizing, why don't we see this in more books? Why isn't this just a normal part of all books? Like, this happens to most women. But also because it is those daily moments, and I assume, and I know for the UK audience too, who, like Jane, you and I in Melbourne, although you've done it longer over there, UK, the lockdowns over the past 18 months, that what we do as parents is try and, I suppose, filter all our own fears and uncertainty and stresses, kind of away from the children in some way where we can. And we've kind of got these big things going on in our lives that we're trying to process at the same time as, the kids are still looking for the one red sock. And that is what takes up the time, is looking for the one red sock, not kind of paying attention to all these huge big things. And I think, I think it's really changing, but I don't think we get to see mums as kind of heroes as much on stage. We are on the screen or in books, and we see women definitely doing that more. But I think that nature of it being mums specifically, and mums who, if you see a bloke doing it, it's often that, the kids are at home with someone else, or, he's the terrible dad who's got out of a relationship, and so he can go and be the superhero that he is. Whereas with mums, you got to do both. So you got to try and save the world and look after the kids at the same time. And one of the lines that I most enjoyed writing towards the end of the book is where Mim's really frustrated and saying, I might have been a hero too. I might have done something heroic, but I was at school pickup, so I couldn't. So that was something I wanted to explore.
Yeah, and I think you definitely do that so well throughout the book. Because I think one of the things I really loved most about Mim was the fact that although she does have all these sort of 1,000 small issues that to a kid and to a parent, a big issues, the small issues become the big issues. But at the heart of it all, you can still see that she is like she's her own person who once was this teenager on the beach, and is this woman who has this kind of, I guess, this ability in her to take part in this very dangerous act, to do what she has to do, and she's sort of often, I think, in literature, mums are they're only mums, and that is, and they may be well written and they may be very believable and things, but that's kind of all they are. As I think Mim is herself, and she's then also a mother, and even though that mothering part is such a huge part of her character, it's not her whole being, which I really love. So congratulations. And one of the many things that, I just, I honestly, I love this book so much. You did such a beautiful job with it. And I wanted to ask you, because I mean, this book, I mean, your first novel, Skylarking, was very different from this. I mean, I think it still has that real Kate Mildenhall stamp on it. So in many ways, it's got all the trademarks that of your writing style, but they are. You've gone really like two very different directions in that. So tell me a little bit about, for those who haven't read it yet, tell us a little bit about Skylarking, and then what that jump was like to go from Skylarking to The Motherfold.
Oh, such a jump. And Skylarking was in ways a kind of an accidental book. It's based on a true story. And I actually kind of came upon it, literally stumbled upon it when I was camping on the south coast of Australia, where I camp often at a lighthouse. And there was a grave near our camping spot of a young woman who had died kind of in tragic circumstances through accidental gunshot. And I became really intrigued in this story, and so kind of fell down the rabbit hole of research, and then started writing this book. I was studying writing at the time, and so I kind of had to hand in assignments, I suppose, and in that way suddenly went, oh, maybe this is a novel that I'm writing. So it was kind of a beautiful first book experience. And the book is very much about this tragic kind of event that occurs, but it's also really about friendship between these two young women, Kate and Harriet. But to do it, I did a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of historical research. Of course, when your first book comes out, people are like, oh, that's what you're going to be. You write historical fiction. And that had never been my plan. It was just the story that kind of comes to me next. So when I had that idea for The Motherfold, and I realized that to get this woman, to get Mim away from Australia, that it was going to have to be this new kind of world, and that meant, oh my goodness, do I have to write speculative fiction? And that just blew my mind, because I thought, oh, well, I read speculative fiction, but I don't know the rules of it, and I haven't read the entire canon, and how will I get it right? But what I did is I took that, I suppose that kind of Margaret Atwood idea, which I know a lot of other people do, that she used for Handmaid's Tale, which was to say, nothing in this world I've created hasn't already happened before historically. So I use the principle of research that I use when I'm writing my historical fiction, again, as I was building the world. And so, even though it looks like this very scary, strange new world, the idea of the estates where people are kind of locked up is purely based on re-education camps in Xinjiang province in China. The idea of disappearances being used as a political weapon, well, that's all throughout history. One of the things that I researched that was really distressing to me was that environmental journalists and activists, often in places like Indonesia and in South America and Africa, are often at real risk of being hurt or killed for following the stories that they follow. So there's actually this incredible website where they upload their stories in progress in case they get killed, so that someone else can report on that story. So, I had so many Google alerts on that. I'm pretty sure that ASIO in Australia has a mark on me, because I was really trying to look at build a world that is plausible politically, and I got to put I suppose my fears and my rage in that world as well, and in terms of the climate kind of emergency things as well. I didn't want to write a sci-fi book, partly because I think if we're writing contemporary fiction, near future fiction right now, the climate emergency is just in there inherently anyway. But I did look at things like sea level rise maps and understand the way bushfire works. My family actually got, everyone was fine. We lost some of our camping stuff, but got impacted by the big summer bushfires here in the summer of 2019, 2020, which impacted so many people here in Australia. And, you know, that changed the way that I thought about writing fire as well, because I realized that I'd predicted a world in 10 years where fire might do one thing, and we have already reached that. So I suppose in that way, writing spec fic allowed me to get some of my current stresses out onto the page, but it was also terrifying. And for my next book, I'm going back to historical fiction again.
And I think, with the climate issues that you bring up in the book, I think is again so well done, because they're so beautifully woven in that you get that sort of haunting sense without it being, you without feeling sort of lectured to, or feeling like this is being kind of put in as a topical issue. It's just something that is affecting the characters and their, in their entire lives. And one of the most, I think, haunting images from your book is there's a moment where the characters are look down into the water and they see from above the old yacht club, which is now submerged, due to rising sea levels. And that was such a haunting, kind of powerful image. I've always sort of remembered that. So yeah, really beautifully done. And you also when you're among the many things you do when you're not writing, you co-host the First Time podcast, where you it's a great podcast for any aspiring writers out there, full of like really useful like tips and conversations and analysis about the writing process. And so you are I would say something of an expert on going through that journey from your first novel to your second novel, and then beyond. So I mean, both in, I guess, in terms of what you've learned, but what you've learned personally. I mean, what's how's it been going from first novel to second novel for you?
Well, I think the great thing that I've learned is that everyone does it completely differently. So I think, you come in and for emerging writers who are watching this potentially, you come in and you think, oh, this is how it happens. I get my book deal and then I'm kind of sorted and I'll go all the way through and I'll just write books. And of course it doesn't happen like that, partly because the process is so different every time. The writing process is different for everyone. And also the industry, changes and different things happen as well. But what I've loved about doing the podcast and interviewing all these incredible writers who I so admire, I grew up reading Kate Grenville, on my shelves. Like the thought that I would get to interview her about how she writes, and that I would make her laugh, it was just like the biggest moment of last year. But I experiment with the kinds of ideas that they do. So, I might say, okay, I'm going to try and write like a crime writer might write this for the next couple of weeks, or I'm going to, do my research like this person does. Or people do crazy things like at one stage, Charlotte Wood recommended that I retype, as in I rekey the manuscript of The Mother Fault to try and really get a sense of, it was during the editing process, of what didn't need to be there. Her theory being that if you can't be bothered rekeying it, then that line should go. So, I feel much more playful now. I think with the process of writing, I feel much more confident with the idea of failure as well. That I think as an early writer, as a first time writer, I was still very stuck on the idea that the words that I put on the page had to be right as they came out. And now I'm much more confident with writing very messy words first and understanding that the process and the way that we change it. George Saunders, in his wonderful new book, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, talks about intuitive iteration, that we just keep getting those lines better and better and better. And so I love that. I love reading and listening to writers talk about the process, because I think, we never stop learning. It's an apprenticeship, and it's such a privilege to be able to write books, and to say that that's my job, that I get to write books. Like 10-year-old me is still losing her mind about the fact that this is my job for the moment. And so I love the idea that I'm always learning, that I just want my books to keep getting better and better, and that I will continue to listen to other people for their advice on how to do that.
And you're right, there's so much advice out there. And I think, yeah, like you said, I think it's really important to acknowledge that people do things so differently, because I find sometimes when people ask about writers' processes, I can, they're in the audience and they've obviously got a manuscript they're working on, and you sort of tell them how you do it, and you can sort of see sometimes their face fall a little bit because they think, oh, that's not how I approach it. And I just, I always sort of want to say to people, however you're doing it, if it's working for you, that is the right way to do it. Like, you're doing great. Like, just keep on.
Absolutely.
Everybody does it their own way, So, but in terms of, since we've got you here, in terms of your way, what is Kate's top tip? What really works for you?
What really works for me in the last year, and this might apply to people either with kids or who are riding around work or with lockdowns or the rest of it, is to use really short bursts of time. So now I set a timer either for 7 minutes, sometimes for 20 if I'm feeling really brave, and I get down the kinds of words that I can get down in that moment. And I'm finding that it's really taking the pressure off me to think, okay, I'm sitting down now to do a 2-hour writing session, which often can make me freeze. And I don't know if this is what happens to you, Jane, or for the writers out there, but also immediately I want a cup of tea to put on a load of washing, to cook a soup, all those other things as well, to kind of, procrastinate. Whereas if I've got 7 minutes, I'm like, okay, I only have to do 7 minutes. And obviously what mostly happens is by the end of that 7 minutes, I'm hooked. And so I keep on going. So I'm really into now, recognizing that there's a voice inside my head which will do anything to make me stop getting my bum in the seat, and it will try and trick me and get me out of that seat and make me do a million things. But if I want to stay in there, I've got to trick myself. So short timed exercises is the new tip that I'm giving.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I actually did something a little bit similar when I was working full time and I was trying to write my first novel. And I used to come home from work and I'd stay in my work clothes, and I would set the time for 1 hour. And I would just sit down and I'd do exactly 1 hour. And then at the end of that hour, I knew I could go and have dinner, watch The Bachelor, do whatever.
Do anything else.
But I would do that 1 hour. And that was sort of kind of how I tricked myself into just sitting down and getting some words down. So in terms of then your writing process now, so what are you working on now?
Well, as I said, I'm going back into history, which has been really, really fun. I'm writing about a real place just outside in Melbourne, a meatworks, and a strike that happened in a meatworks, but also really the lives of women who were involved in that place and that time. So it's been extraordinary. I have been hanging out, as you know that I like to do hands-on research. So I've been hanging out with my local butcher. I've learnt a lot, and yeah, that's what I'm working on next.
Wow. So from, no constraint in genre for Kate.
Well, I like the idea too. I don't know how it happens for other people, but I don't have like a long list of ideas kind of backed up waiting for me. I want to keep writing books for a long time, but there's a moment when the new idea comes and you think, oh, yeah, that's what I want to write about. And then it kind of hooks you and obsesses you. So when a new idea comes, I'm like, so be it from me. I can't say anything about this. I just have to follow you. So that's where it took me.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great approach. And I mean, so before we finish up, I want to tell you my favorite thing about this book, The Motherfold. So my favorite thing about The Motherfold, Kate, is that I think the relationships between the characters. And when I was reading this book, there's some books that I read that I think, how has that author done that? And how can I do that myself? And this was a really good example of that, because I thought when I was reading this book, the way that you've acknowledged that characters' relationships are fluid and people's relationships change, not just over the course of a year. They can change on one sentence within a conversation, and suddenly the whole tone changes and what your perception of that person changes. And I thought the way that you managed to do that so beautifully, with that, to really capture that nuance, hats off to you. Really, really very technically difficult, and it was so beautiful to read. So that was my favorite thing of the many things about The Motherfold. And I wanted to ask you, Kate, what is your favorite thing about this book?
What is my favorite thing about this book? Goodness, I think my favorite thing is that I rewrote the ending and reconceived of the ending of this book many, many times, potentially 20 times. But the final image of the book is one that I had in my head and in my heart right from the very beginning. So it was something that I wrote towards. And of all the changes and the iterations that the book went through, that final image, and for readers, when you get there, was one that was like a beacon, I suppose, for me in the writing.
Yeah, and I mean, and they've all got that to look forward to. I'm so jealous of all you readers out in the UK who get to discover this book for the first time. It's an absolute cracker. It's The Mother Fault. It is out now in the UK from HarperCollins. Seek it out. You will thank me later. And Kate Mildenhall, thank you so much for talking to me about this beautiful book, and for writing it in the first place. What a joy it was to read. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Jane Harper, thank you so much for speaking to me. It's an absolute joy. Thank you so much. And thank you to UK readers. And I hope you enjoy.